AC, we are taking probably the widest diversion beyond Hammerland that I think we've taken this month, this lovely end of September episode on Repulsion,
Yep.
1965. I like it when we talk about directors who don't really have like a history or a controversy surrounding them because it's so dull, just talking about exciting lives
Yeah.
and things and crimes. So Roman Polanski directed
Yep.
Repulsion in
Yep.
1965. Um, and it's, before we started, really recording in earnest, I mentioned that I made a big mistake in watching this film, as I often do, right before we talk about it, because I'd never seen Repulsion before. I watched it this morning, and it's something that I feel like I need to watch like a month in advance of any conversation and work out all
Mm.
my feelings because there's so much going on here. Not all of it great, and even the great stuff, I feel icky because of the subject
Yeah.
matter. I'm like, wow, this is amazing, but it's also, really unfortunate and terrible.
Yeah.
These poor people, um, or poor person. I think there's only one, I think, even semi-sympathetic character of this entire movie, and it's our protagonist Carol, played by Catherine Deneuve. But before we get into all of that, how you doing?
I'm doing great. And I also had not revisited this one in quite a while. So I was thankful for the opportunity to go back and check it out. I watched the Criterion uh, DVD release, which has commentary by Polanski and Catherine Deneuve. And and I don't think I'd ever listened to it before. So that was informative. And as you know, having watched the movie, there's so much happening visually that it's not. I didn't feel like I was missing as much by not having the sound. Although the sound design is pretty great as well.
I'm curious about that commentary because I assume it was recorded contemporarily and not because
Yes,
they didn't really have commentaries back in 1965.
right.
Given, maybe we can start here because I feel like it's almost unfair for me to talk about Repulsion, uh, partially because of what I know of Roman Polanski.
Right.
I feel like my understanding of what he did and, the subsequent decades since he, was convicted of that crime, and then fled to France, informs how I feel about Repulsion, even though this movie was made 12 years or so before that even happened.
Right.
So I'm wondering, was this kind of monster that, he is slash was, I don't know his personal history or if he's reformed in the last, 50 years or whatever. But, was this kind of a confession on film to how he feels about, the opposite sex? Is this him sort of trying to white knight in a way, saying, oh yeah, men are just so gross and sleazy and repulsive. Look at this, but I'm a nice guy. I'm making this movie that understands women. So cozy up to me, ladies. Like all of these thoughts were going through my head watching this
Hmm.
movie. And it's an emotional, visceral roller coaster. But what's your history with this? You said you'd seen it once and you're revisiting it now. So what
I've
was
seen it a
your
few times. I've
Oh,
seen it a
you've
few
seen it a few
times.
times. Okay.
This is in Horror 101, the first book. I feel like it is kind of a cornerstone of horror. I feel like it was Polanski's second film, and it's the one he did, I think, just prior to doing Rosemary's Baby. I'm not sure if he had one in there in between, but it's very much it's Polanski's first English language film, and it
Hmm.
kind of introduces him to the popular film market. And Tony Tenzer, the producer, who did several of these kind of lower budget British horror films, he said that, I asked for a Mini Cooper, and you brought me a Rolls Royce. And what he meant by that is both, yes, it's much higher quality than I expected. However, it also cost more than was expected, and it took longer to shoot than expected. And so it was one of those things where Tony Tenzer was just looking for a good horror film he could put into the cinemas. And instead, Polanski turns in a masterpiece. And Polanski says on the commentary, it's like, if I hadn't made the Rolls Royce, I could have made the Mini Cooper, but if I hadn't made the Rolls Royce, I wouldn't be here now. I wouldn't have had the opportunity to do Rosemary's Baby. I wouldn't have had the opportunity to get into the Hollywood system.
It is his big break, but I mean, from what I was reading on a bit of Wikipedia digging, like he had won, or I think he'd been nominated. His first feature had been for
Knife in the
like
Water.
best international foreign film. He was 29, so he's,
Yeah.
this is kind of a wonderkin situation.
Yep.
But I mean, the movie is about. Let's talk about what the film is actually about. It's this
Sure.
young, she's a Belgian girl living in a young woman named Carol, played by Catherine Deneuve, living in London with her sister Helen. They have a flat together. Helen is seeing an older gentleman who I didn't pick up on the fact that apparently he was married. Is that
Oh,
is that
yeah.
the case? Okay, I
Yep.
missed some key dialogue there or something.
Yeah.
But she's being kind of awkwardly courted. I'll say that's the most polite way I can say it, by a guy named Colin, who is infatuated with her, and she doesn't quite know what to do about him or about people in general. She works in a spa. She's sort of alienated from everybody. And as the film goes on, you get these kind of cues that she has some kind of like a major trauma in her life that we are not privy to, and we're not ever really privy to it until the very end, where the last shot is very much this rosebud sled of this
Mhm.
movie, a very key piece of information that reframes everything we've watched before, in a sense. But yeah, as the film goes on, she goes through this deep mental breakdown, which results in murders. But even that, we're left up until like the final scene or the final kind of set piece. Is this all in her mind? Is this really happening? What's going on? I felt like this is a combination of like American Psycho and Gene Dealman and a bunch of other kind of trippy movies about navigating the world and the battle of the sexes. Um, but let me ask you this, AC. Especially, I'm going back to this commentary idea.
Mhm.
I assume Roman Polanski was just talking about the making of the movie and was not talking about anything related to his
No, like where
charges or
his
any.
inspirations, came from or anything like that. No, he didn't talk about his history or his his having to, being in exile. None of that came up. But he was just doing the commentary. There was nobody like interviewing him.
You said, was Catherine Deneuve on the track with him?
They had two separate tracks that they'd kind of blended together, so they were not in the same studio at the same time.
Interesting. But as someone now, did you, when you watched this movie for the first time, I assume you were aware of the 1977 case where Polanski essentially he fled the United States after being accused of sexually assaulting a 13-year-old girl. From what I understand, he was brought up on a number of charges. The most serious of them were dropped, so he was going to get a relatively light sentence. But the evening before his sentencing, his attorney got wind that the judge was planning to just reverse that and give him 50 years. And so
Mhm.
then he left, and he has not been back to the States since.
Right.
Keeps making movies. He's won some Oscar nominated and probably award-winning movies in the years since, but he's not been back on U.S. soil. That's all to give background to this very strange movie about lascivious, sexually assaultive, inappropriate behavior by men on
Right.
this, attractive young woman. She's not 13. But were you aware of this context when you watched Repulsion? How did that color your not enjoyment, experience of the
No, not
movie?
sure. I would say the first time I saw it, I was I don't know how and to be honest, I don't know how well informed I am about the facts of the case in question. I mean, I know what he was accused of, and I know what he was convicted of, and I know that he hasn't been back. All the things you just said. But I think I was watching it purely from a filmmaking standpoint, and I wasn't really looking at. I was, I wasn't even thinking about the art and the artist. I was just thinking about the film in front of me. So yes, watching it now, there's definitely, but I don't think I view Polanski as a monster. Um, I view him, and I view him as somebody who transgressed. I don't know that it was a pattern for him. Again, I don't know enough about him to say. I know that there was this case, and I don't know the facts in that case.
Hmm.
But that's so. I view. Here's what I will say about Polanski: is I feel like he should have to answer for a crime. Like the fact that the Academy, the Academy gave him an Oscar, it's kind of like, well, I don't know that we should celebrate this man who is a criminal, who has not ever paid his debt.
Yeah.
So I have that sitting with me. But again, because you commit a crime, does it make you a criminal? And is that all you are? And I think I don't, again, that's where I go. Is it habitual or is it an incident? Either way, he should have to pay for what he did. But in terms of me coloring my view of Polanski, what he is to me is somebody who committed statutory rape and then left and never came back and has not, to my knowledge, apologized or conceded that he did it.
Right. And I know from what I've read, there have been other people who've come forth in the intervening decades to, make accusations. But
Okay.
again, and as we're seeing right now, there's news headlines about people who are being tried in the court of public opinion without, names or all that stuff. So it's very sticky because I'm kind of in the same boat. I guess it's because I kind of grew up. I mean, this crime happened, or alleged crime, whatever happened, the year I was born. So I've
Mm,
never known a world where it's like Roman Polanski is just the guy who made these amazing movies. It's he
right.
did this and he was also accused of this. And I'm not familiar with his filmography. I don't think I've watched Rosemary's Baby in its entirety ever in one sitting.
Okay.
So that's a blind spot I have to fix. This is my first real experience of Polanski. And I hate to say it, but like it is an amazing movie. And it's,
Right.
it just grabbed me on every level, even in the parts where there's a bit of my brain where I'm like, I feel like there's, like I said, a confession going on here, or this
Mm,
is the way that I'm, exercising this demon inside of me is on film and putting these characters through it. But it's also, wow, what technique, what style. I could not believe some of the things I was seeing, and some
right.
of the techniques, some of the ideas that I feel like I've seen in movies that came out later, like the bit where Carol is walking down her hallway and all these hands like
Yes.
come out of the wall and grab her. I immediately thought there's Day of the Dead right there, that
Hmm.
nightmare sequence. The bit where she's cracking up and the walls are literally cracking. I
Yeah.
mean, it looks seamless, and the sound design, it's like a crack, but there's almost like an organic gargle to it. And the score of this film is just it's phenomenal. So yeah, I appreciate this movie on several levels, but I also feel
Right.
gross, and not even just because the subject matter. Let's just assume Polanski is a squeaky clean guy with tremendous insight into the world of lascivious men. This movie still feels gross.
Sure. Well, and that's absolutely the fact is that, this is a commentary on male behavior, and men are not presented in a good light. There's not a single good man on screen, I don't think.
Right.
And the women are more sympathetic. I feel like, her coworkers, her boss, um, her sister is participating in some questionable behavior and is a bit, but also I feel like there's that kind of that felt right in terms of that sibling relationship. That's
Yeah.
like, don't judge me. And, this is my flat. You're here with me. So I felt like that all felt authentic. But yeah, the fact that it is a commentary on the men behaving badly, I feel like I think that's coming from an authentic place for Polanski, that he recognizes that this is behavior and that it's not easy being a woman, in that time or any
Well, I
time.
mean, yeah, I mean, and that's kind of the struggle. I was thinking a lot about the Barbie movie while I was watching this. I don't know. Did you see that?
I did.
Okay. That is, I've got several issues with that film and what it has to say about the relationship between the sexes. But I think at least in that case, you had at least some positive portrayals of, male behavior along with the toxic behavior. So there was that bit of a balance. But
Hmm.
I noticed, in this movie, you mentioned the women are more sympathetic. They're more sympathetic, and I think they're less cartoonishly bad. I mean, because
Mm,
every cliche stereotype you've got about men is on display in this movie. From
sure.
her walking down the street and running into a construction guy who's like, making eyes at her and, wolf whistling or whatever, to, no one can look at, Catherine Deneuve without like looking her up and down and thinking like, oh, I'd like there to be some subtext here.
Right.
But with the women, I noticed, they're calling each other bitches left and right. There is that kind of cliche cattiness. The one instance where someone says that, oh, Carol, you should smile. Her friend, was it Bridget? Am I getting that right? The person, yeah, Helen Fraser, I think. Yeah, her coworker says that to her. So I thought that was interesting. This does come down on the anti-man side of things, but there is a bit of a balance to kind of. I think you could walk away from this movie to say people are just really kind of screwed up, hitting like all around.
Yeah, I would say it is. It's not a. It's a commentary on society as a whole. But again, I feel like you're correct in that there are no positive portrayals of men, and there are some sympathetic in that, like her coworkers trying to cheer her up, and the boss says something to the effect of, "I can't help you if I don't know what's going on." So it's like she's being reasonable, and saying you can't just disappear for 3 days and without. But I mean, we're watching her character, Catherine Deneuve's character, slowly kind of breaking down, and she goes into these kind of almost trances where she just kind of finds herself staring at cracks in the sidewalk, or just staring off into space, or down into her handbag, where she just kind of gets lost.
Mm-hmm.
And that the prop that you're talking about, we can throw up spoilers at some point.
Wait, hold on, let's do it. There we go.
There we go. So, I mean, the picture, the family portrait that we see throughout the film, but the idea of like it providing much insight, I don't know. I mean, what I don't get a big reveal a la Rosebud. What I get is this has been the case for a long time, and people just let it go. They just ignored it.
The case of just like dealing with like male chauvinism in the world, or something.
No. Sorry, the fact that Helene is like just lost. Not Helene.
Carol.
Carol.
Carol. Yeah.
That Carol is someone who is has some kind of mental disconnect, emotional disconnect, in that she doesn't even look at the camera for a family photo. And so it's the fact that it has gone on and gone on and gone on unaddressed, that people keep treating her like she's normal when she's not. She needs help.
And I think, there may be other issues there, but I am convinced, and again, we've got the spoiler tag on, and we are jumping way to the end of the movie.
Sure.
But I am convinced that her father, or whoever the man is in that photo, let me just go back to the framing of this.
Sure.
At the end of the film, a bunch of neighbors come to the apartment, which is a complete disaster, and Carol is being taken out of the apartment by Michael, played by Ian Hendry, whom I assume is the reason we're talking about this for Beyond Hammerland, because he's this is so not a Hammer film, but he is, a recurring guest star in a lot of the Hammer films we talked about, and he's great. But he kind of takes her out somewhere, and the camera goes into the living room and goes around this disaster and goes, across the walls and down onto the floor. And we see this picture frame that we've seen in close up once, and sort of a medium shot when the lascivious landlord was handling it a few minutes before.
Mm-hmm.
But we get a close up. The way that the light falls on this, there's shadows kind of like Xing through a lot of the people in the photograph. But what you have framed in two of the crosses of the X are Carol as a young girl staring off into, staring away from the camera off to her left. Yep. And then we see a man who's sitting in a chair. We clearly see his entire head. We see a woman, possibly we possibly see a mother, but it's just her hair. So she's kind of like cropped out. But what we clearly see, and the camera zooms in on this, the first couple of times we see the photograph, we notice everybody's looking at the camera except Carol is kind of staring off into space. Right. What we get with this zoom in, because it zooms all the way into her eyes, and the movie opens with a close of Carol's eyes as an adult. As we zoom in, if you'll notice where her pupils are looking, they're looking directly across at her father, or whoever that man is. So it's not like, oh, I'm just staring off into space. It reminded me, strangely enough, of the end of Sleepaway Camp with the reveal of Angela, how she's like, she's been fully revealed and her eyes are definitely like looking and pointed. That's the same thing that we see with Carol's eyes here. It's like, I am pointing at this man. We're having this happy family photo, but you are, doing things to me, sir. I can't be all happy. So that's the context we get. So I feel like it invites going back to watch Repulsion now that we know what the deal is. And be like, well, no wonder she's going through this. She's in her early 20s and no one's ever thought to talk to her about this.
Right. Again, an issue that has not been addressed.
Yeah.
And that she is not equipped to address.
And no one around her seems to be either, because
that's what I mean. Like everybody just kind of like lets it go by. And I mean, the idea of her, I mean, she experiences repulsion at the touch of or the attention of any man. And we see those, she has fantasies, not fantasies, sorry, that's a poor way of expressing it. But right. She has these phantom attacks in her, a bedroom late at night. And that is the same character as the construction worker. That's our construction worker that Kat calls her. That's the figure in her room that repeatedly attacks her and assaults her.
Is that the same character? Because I recognized him once, but there are, I think, 3 of those nightmare, attacks before the real one happens at the end with the landlord.
Right.
Wow. But I thought like one of them, like the last one, it looked more like the Michael character, like the married boyfriend of the sister. It is all very dark. And it's kind of a phantom attacker, which may be the point. But right. What's the eeriest thing about this is the sound completely drops out of these scenes, and all you can hear is the ticking clock, almost to tell us, yes, this is a nightmare sequence. It's happening at night, while she's snoozing, where this is the clock, kind of like doing its thing, but she can't wake up from it and we can't look away. Yeah. Again, you sometimes wonder what kind of deranged mind can make up this kind of stuff. And like, it's something, yeah. Wow.
Well, and it feels, I mean, again, it feels so real to her, but the mental collapse, I think, yes, you're right in that there may have been a history of sexual abuse in her family. I think also there's something, just something inherent about her mental condition in that she doesn't know how to cope with that.
Right. And that's what I'm talking about. Like the other people around her don't either, because even when Colin, who, my first thought was their first meeting in the film is she's like at a cafe and he like knocks on the window and, can I come in kind of thing. I can't tell if he just saw her on the street and fancies her, or if they like what kind of history. We don't get a big like, oh yeah, we've been talking for a month, or I ran into her last week. It's just this kind of guy who sticks around and he wants to get into her pants, and he's got these, jerk buddies that he meets up with the bar, and they have some crazy ideas about like, well, maybe you just invite her back to our place for some brandy and hey, maybe all of us can get on the action. I'm like, these are all monsters. But Colin, even when he's dealing with her and he gets the sense that, oh, there's something really wrong here, he doesn't quite know how to reach out. He's uncomfortable and he kind of turns away. Even when he shows up at the end to try and help her and barge into her place.
I like, help her. Yeah. Let me break your door in.
I could understand that if like he had heard her screaming on the inside.
Right,
but it's
exactly. Again, this is one of those, it's not about you, it's about me.
Right. But I'm saying like his inability to talk, like, because if I were in that situation, heaven forbid, and maybe this is because I grew up in the era of like pop psychology and stuff, it's like, hey, can I help you? Do you need help? Can I call your sister? Like, what's going on? I've noticed, people have been, concerned about you, instead of like, I'm going to break down the door.
Yeah.
And where she's been having these nightmares about people coming into her room and attacking her. Like, no, this is the exact wrong move.
And what happens to Colin, I think it's great because it's so shocking. I don't know that we see her capable of doing that at the time. She seems such a fragile, kind of lost character. And the way she performs the murder, it's done in almost like a sleepwalker, like she has no expression on her face at all.
Right. And the because when he comes in, or right before he makes his way into the building or the apartment, she grabs this giant like candlestick,
Candlestick, yeah.
right? And she has it behind her back. And when he's talking to her, you almost get lulled into this sense of like maybe she's not afraid of him or doesn't think anything's going to happen. Maybe we're in the clear as the audience. But he goes and looks out the peephole, and we see the peephole jump,
Mhm.
and we know that she's been struck from behind, and then she repeatedly beats him. You're right. It's shocking. It reminded me almost of another film, Spider Baby, at the
Mhm.
end where the
Mhm.
sisters like charge down the stairs of these, into the cellar to attack with the knives. I'm like, this is Fury Unleashed, as they say, but that's nothing compared to the attack on the landlord, which is
Right.
so shocking because I have never felt this way before. I've seen POV shots of like killers attacking people. I've never felt so uncomfortable as to feel like I'm being assaulted right now with a razor and I can't escape.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I love the fact that, we've, especially as horror fans, we've seen so many throat slits, seen so many throat slits. What we don't see is the cut across the back of the neck. And it's like, I love the fact that like that gets subverted, like it's like nobody suspects, like, oh, geez. And he keeps bringing his hand away because, and they do mention this on the commentary, like when you get cut with a razor, it's such a thin line,
It's like a paper cut. Yeah.
and then the blood hits. And especially it's just like, oh, he does have that moment of like, is it? And then it gets worse and worse and worse. And then she goes into her slashing and just hacks him to pieces. The fact that she has Colin's body just like kind of dumped in the bathtub, and just that's where Colin lives for the remainder of the time that her sister's out of town. And then the landlord gets just like pushed over in the couch, and we have this rabbit that was supposed to be prepared the first night that we meet Carol, and because they don't have time, they decide to go out to eat, and so this rabbit just sits there and just decays and decays and decays. And I mean, I think that's kind of representative of many things. I mean, it could be representative of Carol's, decaying mind, or just the decaying of society, or that's one of the things I love about horror films, is that you can have layered in message and commentary, but you can also just have a straight up, it's unpleasant to imagine a room that smells like rotting rabbit and dead bodies.
And at the same time, well, I want to put a pin in that because that's something I want to talk about in a sec. But at the same time, there's this plate of potatoes, which
Right.
we keep coming back to, which seem to be sprouting, like the roots and the shoots are coming out of it. So it is growing at the same time the rabbit's decaying. We
Yeah.
also get the sense that they are breaking out, as if, these things that will not be contained anymore are starting to flourish, much like as her mind deteriorates, this other kind of identity bursts through. And that's beautiful. It's pretentious filmmaker nonsense, but it also, when it works, it so works.
Yeah.
But I do want to talk about the smell, because yes, there's the rotting tray of rabbit, but also after Colin dies and is shoved in the bathtub, in another truly amazing sequence, because when she brings his body in and dumps it into the tub of water, I'm like, well, there doesn't appear to be any blood anywhere until his mouth opens, and then it all
Yep.
comes out, and the actor's eyes kind of open up at that moment, but he's not blinking or anything. He's so committed it's not a dummy as far as I can
No,
tell.
no,
It's just
yeah.
it looks like a corpse. But how many days has that body been in the bathtub to the point when the landlord shows up? Why isn't he walking in there like, oh, what is going
Yeah.
on
Right.
here?
Right. Yeah,
Oh.
absolutely. And I mean, that's the thing. And I want to go back to that moment with Colin, because when Colin breaks in the door, also, that's not how consent works, folks. But when Colin breaks in the door, uh, the neighbor with the dog is standing there and watching and watching and watching and watching. And I could not help but think of the scene in Irreversible, where there's a shot of somebody who comes down in the middle of an assault,
Hmm.
stands there for a second, and then leaves. And you think, oh, maybe they're going to get help, but they never come back.
Right.
And it's that same kind of idea of, you got somebody who's witnessing, basically somebody breaking into somebody else's house against their wishes and not knowing what to do. I'm, like the most she can do is to stand there and let him know that she sees, but nothing comes of it.
And the way that scene was framed, because Colin is very much, in the foreground talking to her. In the background, we can see the lady, but he is alternately covering up the little lady in the
Exactly.
hallway.
Has
I
she
was
left?
waiting.
Has she left? Yeah.
Exactly. I was waiting for that little bit of a reveal. And even though it's, nothing happened with it, it's still just that anticipation, just another subtle way to keep the audience on edge, because we don't know if something is going to happen with this candlestick or the neighbor or what the deal is. On top of that, again, let's jump ahead a bit here, because I could talk about this movie for 6 hours and we don't have that kind of time. But at the end, when, she has killed the landlord, because he comes, he's a sympathetic character to me up to a certain point.
The landlord?
Yes, because
Wow. Okay.
he's he's brusque, he's kind of a jerk, but from his point of view, he's got these two sisters living in his apartment, and they are at least a week and a half, 2 weeks late on the rent, and they keep saying, "Oh, I'll have it tomorrow. I'll have it, in 3 days." So when he's calling up, yeah, he's not very pleasant, but he also needs his money, right?
Sure.
He shows up at the very end, and yeah, like when I say, when he comes into the apartment, that's when everything, like, oh no, he's no longer just the guy coming, I need my rent. He's like propositioning her, saying, well, the rent's not so important. Maybe you and me could do something. And he's walking around the room. He's touching her. He's leaning in suggestively and leaning in again and again, because she's not giving him anything. So he doesn't know how to read cues at all, or he doesn't care. And then he assaults her. And then there's that razor bit. But after he's dead, and after she has some more kind of like these nightmares, these delusions, cut to some time later, we see Helen and Michael coming back from their trip to Pisa with the Leaning Tower, which I can't help was also symbolic, because it's a building that should be standing straight, but it's a little bit
Mm-hmm.
off. And you're like, what's
Mm-hmm.
going on with that? They come home in the rain. Helen goes up to the apartment first. She goes in. The place is completely trash and it's so dark. And she goes into the bathroom and she's frightened, paralyzed with fear. Michael comes in. He's like, what's going on? And he like shakes her around, slaps her a couple of times, which I guess is what you did in the 60s.
That's what you do,
My goodness. But then he goes and sees what's going on. He goes to get help. And that in this entire 5 minutes or how long it lasts, I'm a nervous wreck, because it's filmed like lots of rooms down one long dark hallway. You never know when someone could jump out with a razor or come out screaming or whatever. I don't care if it's Helen, I don't care if it's Michael, whoever. But then where's Carol? We have no idea. The neighbors show up. Michael's going into the elevator. Like, is she hiding in there? It's complete horror movie mastery. And then when we finally do see her, it's even creepier, because her hand is just like poking out from underneath the mattress. Like, wait, is she dead? Did the bed fall on her or whatever? No, she's catatonic. Is she really catatonic? Does she have the razor hidden up her, slip, and she's going to attack Michael when they're alone? I don't know. Up until the very end of the film, I I really want to watch more Roman Polanski movies, and I wish there were more Roman Polanski movies of this type. I also wish I could watch them without thinking of this subtext, but I just can't. It's a
Yeah.
horrible place to be.
Well, it's interesting because there's the quote apartment trilogy, which starts with this film, Rosemary's Baby, and then there's The Tenant, and I think The Tenant's 1976, maybe, where Polanski plays the titular character. He directs himself, and he's wonderful in it. It's a terrific film, and he's terrific in it. It's unfortunate that it was in 76 because it's post-flight. So you can't help but kind of watch it in that vein.
Well, no, because it
was it 77? So it's not
77 is when the crime happened. Yeah.
Okay. So it was pre crime. But anyway, it's a wonderful, wonderful film. But I think on the commentary, Catherine Deneuve says that kind of Polanski's directing style is to basically act it out for you. And he's very kind of do it like this, do this with do this gesture, do this, he's very specific. And she's like, I think he wanted to play, you know, this part. And then he later does play that part.
Which again, yeah, I could see someone appreciating his genius and going, very method, like, oh, you really feel like it feels like you've really thought about these things. And like, yeah, I
Mm,
kind of wonder. Um, but yeah, I mean, in terms of just like the pure filmmaking,
yeah.
it London has never looked better. Or it's
Or
a
worse.
very well, but I mean, like, it's a contrast because it's a very alive, happening kind of place. You want to go and live in 1960s London, but then you see the people that are inhabiting it. Like, these folks are all miserable and dark, and that seems to be like a commentary or a contrast. Like, the one bright spot that seems to offer, I'm not sure if it's hope or like a cosmic taunt to Carol, is she looks out her bedroom window and she
Hmm.
sees there's like a convent across the street, and she keeps seeing these nuns playing basketball and she's fascinated by them. I
Yeah.
don't know if that is some kind of a commentary on like religion is the thing that she needs, but it's just out of reach. I don't know if it's the idea of, wow, that's what like sisterhood really feels like. I don't have a
Mhm.
relationship with my own, flesh and blood sister, but it's
Right.
another thing that just makes you think.
I also like the buskers, the traveling buskers, the guy with the banjo and then the two spoons players who are just again moving almost like grotesques, like they're bent over and moving like this weird kind of performance art piece. And I found that fascinating. And fun fact, when she looks down and sees those buskers from her window, uh, they only got the spoon player and the banjo, and so that's Roman Polanski pretending to play the spoons uh, as part of the trio. He just threw like a jacket over his head and is playing the spoons player. So I thought that was funny.
Wow. When we first see the buskers, I thought that was another, maybe this is a little bit too, 2020s commentary or lens, but I thought it was some kind of a jab at men just like taking up space, like moving through the world as if they own it, because they're like stopping traffic so that they can
Yep.
have a little song and dance, like moving across the street. You even see cars like, just come on, like, move on.
I
I
was
got
also
places
just
to
like, I
go.
mean, you don't, I would not want to be a pedestrian in London. I mean, those cars are just like zipping by and like, it doesn't seem like there's any rhyme or reason to when you can cross the street. You just hope for the best.
Well, when Carol and Colin are sitting outside the apartment in that convertible,
Yeah,
she just gets out and almost gets
that's right.
sideswiped by a car.
Yeah. Cars,
Oh,
cars are dangerous.
very much so. Let's see what
I'm,
else.
I am
Oh,
curious before we go on to what your next point is. I'm curious about your feeling about. I feel like we had a similar discussion when we talked about. Oh shoot, what was the Carrie Mulligan film where she plays the avenging angel? Anyway,
yes. I
bright young woman, promising young woman,
Promising
promising
Young
young
Woman.
woman.
Yes, I was thinking of Best, but yes.
we had a
Yeah.
similar discussion where all the men are evil in that movie. And my feeling is uh yes, it would be nice if we could have some representation of positive men, but also, what? It's like, it's too bad, there's a lot of even the best of men, I think sometimes uh don't step up in the right way, and so we're all a little accountable.
Right, but my problem with that is that also, just because it has to, also applies to women, because people are flawed, right?
Sure.
There is toxic masculinity. I also believe there is such thing as toxic femininity. Now,
I agree.
the definitions get a little blurry, but my problem when it comes to those kinds of movies, and this film, I think, escapes. I love this movie, but I think it's got some caveats to it because there are no positive representations of men in it, really. But you have to consider it is trying to say something. It does have that on its mind, but it's also told from the perspective of someone who is going through a mental breakdown. So it's
Right.
possible that there were
Her view
positive people.
is, yeah.
Right. It's possible that maybe she just didn't notice, or she was exaggerating the features of people who were trying to be kind to her, and it all
Sure.
just came out as these ghouls. I don't know. But yeah, it's just because I remember Promising Young Woman also ended with a violent kind of attack, and I think I need to watch that movie again. But yeah, it just bothers me a bit because I think it's when it swings a little too hard in one direction, I feel like I'm watching a cartoon. And
Hmm.
the other problem, and this is just the baggage that I bring into these movies, because there are a lot of them. There are a lot of films that, especially in the last few years, rightfully or wrongfully, however you want to look at it, have been not too kind on men and talking about toxic masculinity and those power dynamics. I'm sitting here watching, these movies, and I'm like, I don't know these men. Like
Hmm.
the portrayal of these women moving through this world where everybody's a predator, everybody is, two-faced or whatever. I Maybe it's because I choose to surround myself with what I consider to be, yes, nobody's perfect, but
Sure.
nice guys who, if they saw someone catcalling a woman in the street or propositioning her, or they walk in and they see, like in Irreversible, they see someone being, attacked in a tunnel, they're going to go up and say, "Hey, you know, what the hell do you think you're doing?" Or
Right.
"I'm calling the cops right now." So when I see these things, it's almost a personal affront to me because my version of reality is I don't know these people. I don't know what world you're living in, but you're going a little bit too far in the exaggeration mode.
Really? See, I agree with you in that, my sphere is not that sphere, but I 100% believe that there are large pockets of the world where that is reality and where that does occur. And yes, I agree. Because we are privileged, we are able to surround ourselves with people of our choosing and move in the circles that we choose, whereas that's not necessarily the case for many people. And so, like if there, I don't mind being presented with a worldview that is not my own. And if that worldview shows uh, a world in which most, if not all, men behave badly, I'm like, okay, so there's a larger issue at take. I mean, I don't think anybody could deny that, like, there's a patriarchal system in place and that women are operating within that system. And how could it not make them toxic at some point?
Well, I mean, that's a whole different discussion. I will concede that there may be such a thing as a patriarchy, but I can't really get into it right now, but I'm not going to concede that it
Sure.
is just built, for men only to succeed, if only because I think that denigrates the tremendous accomplishments and leaderships of powerful women that we have had for hundreds, if not thousands of years.
I
So
don't think it
it's a
denigrates it. I think it actually accentuates it. It says they've had to rise above even
right.
greater
Right,
challenges.
but most people who ascend to levels of power, even men, have to go through those great challenges. There are reasons that ascending to those great heights, whether it's in politics or business, is
Right.
difficult because it's difficult for anybody to achieve it.
100%.
Um, but that's sort of
And
the
we could
issue.
talk about it some other time. Yeah.
Right, but I mean,
But
I'm saying, yeah, women have it bad, men have it bad as well. The degrees, yes, we can argue whether, the differences and whether or not those differences, like, quote unquote, what do they mean big picture? My
right.
issue is when I'm watching movies that seem to have, like, movies and entertainment, TV shows, TV commercials that all seem to move in one direction. I'm
Mhm.
like, back off. Like I would feel the same way if I was watching, movies where all the women are bimbos and, just good for walking around in bikinis and, go get me a sandwich. If I
Sure.
was inundated with that, and, look at 1980s sex comedies, there definitely was a
Yeah.
time when that was
Uh-huh.
the case. But, I don't subscribe to that. I don't cotton to it. So yeah, I just would appreciate a bit of balance. But in the case of Repulsion, I'm fine with it being tilted in one direction because I can fully understand how someone who went through that horrific experience, whether or not you think it's just mental issues or it's mental issues brought on by
Right.
traumatic experiences, or maybe they're just a confluence of both. Yeah, it's horrifying. And I really felt for Carol at the end. I didn't see her as a monster. I just saw her as someone, the natural result of someone who had nowhere else to go and no one to lean on because the world is just so crazy around her and
That's right.
uncaring.
Yeah. And I think that's it. She is the monster and she is the victim, like
Yeah.
she is both of those. And it's not of her. She didn't create the situation. The situation happened to her.
Right. Yeah. Just on the idea of the degrees of toxic masculinity, there is that scene at the bar where Colin is talking to his two friends,
Right.
and he's kind of like, I think we'd seen them together once before, and he was joking around with them and stuff, and talking about like, oh, have you gotten into that girl Carol's skirt yet or whatever.
Right.
But at that bar scene, they're taking it way too far, and even that, I'm just seeing these two goofball balls of insecurity because I'm like, these guys have no game. They're just talking a
Sure.
lot of trash.
Yeah.
But you can see Colin getting upset,
Right.
especially when the one friend suggests they have a little party and all that stuff. He's like, even if it's more of a territorial thing, like, hey, she's mine and you can't have her. But there did seem to be a bit of a line crossing. And the guys, when Colin like has his outbursts, are like, hey, buddy, what are you
Right.
so upset about? I'm like, yeah, I have seen that before.
Yeah. Well, and Colin, I think I think we're intended to see Colin as a quote nice guy. Like he just wants to date her. He just wants to take her out. But the fact remains that she's not interested, and he doesn't take no for an answer. And that's where my sympathies drop off for him. But I see him trying to struggle with, but again, is that about because he identifies himself as, well, if I'm not dating somebody, if I'm not sexually active with somebody, what does that say about me as a man? Like, I have to wonder if that's what's going on for him. And that's why, the bear keeps getting poked.
Right, and he could have just never met someone like her before. Not necessarily as someone who said no, but someone who's very kind of hard to read and
Right.
mysterious, because that's an angle that she presents too. As an audience member, I can clearly see, because I've seen her interactions with all these other people. I've seen her private moments as a character. I like, no, she's going through something. She needs help. She doesn't need to be hit on. But as someone who's had very limited interactions with her, probably in public, he could be seeing through his lens like, oh,
Right.
she's so mysterious and maybe
Yeah.
she's
Yeah.
playing hard to get, and maybe I need to step up and be more aggressive because that's what she wants. It's completely deranged. But I can also see he's such a great gray character, because I don't see him as a villain or as a monster. There are definitely
Right.
monsters in this movie. He's not one of them. He's just completely clueless and unhelpful.
Right. Right. Yeah. And again, I mean, yes, the goofballs at the bar, but I mean, I also saw them as authentic. Like those are real. We have people like that in the world, like that are
Right.
just and they are flanking our main characters, like we find ourselves surrounded by those people.
Yes. Um,
So I didn't see them as
quite
cartoons, I guess is my point. It's just like they are acting cartoony, but I'm like, no, that feels like real people taking up space in that world.
It well, here's the thing. It does, and I think American Psycho is a good, comparison, because but that's a satire of men as written by a guy who had spent a lot of time around those men. So they are very exaggerated, and the whole idea of Patrick Bateman being a serial killer in addition to being a Wall Street trader, that was, part of the satire and the social commentary.
Right.
Whereas here, when everybody, especially every man in the movie, is presented in a certain way, I can't help but see this as kind of a gross exaggeration. Taken in pockets, yes. Each of
Mm.
the archetypes that are presented here, you can probably find, and you might not have to look very far to find that represented in the world. But to buy the fact that over the course of this week, these characters are only encountering this specific brand of toxic man, again, it's just a bit, I'm like, this is where the director is speaking to me. Do you get it? Do you get the sly commentary? I'm like, yeah, and it only really works if there's a balance and sort of a recentering to reality. If there had been one person who had, maybe at the bar said, look, guys, just keep it down. I'm pretty sure talking about like gang raping someone and that's not on. Maybe that didn't happen in 1965, but I almost guarantee it would happen in 2023, at least, in some places.
Yeah, I think that's it. It's some places, and also just I think you bring a great point that it is through her lens that all men are terrifying to her. You
Yeah.
know, like all men present a threat.
And the ambiguity of the ending where she's being taken away by Michael,
Right.
And even when he looks at her, he kind of looks at her like, what happened to you? But then he's kind of like, hey, I know I've made some advances on you before, but now you're literally in my arms. I'm like, just stop. No, this
Well,
is not the time.
and what's
There's never a time,
interesting,
but
what was interesting about that is like that is like she's finally not at peace, but she's escaped the emotional turmoil because she's catatonic. It's like she's gone so far that now she does have comfort of a sort in being held by a man because
well,
he's taking her someplace where she will be cared for.
and I wonder about that because they walk out of frame, and that's when we get the pan around the living room. So we never find out what happened to either of them.
Right.
There is an interpretation, and I think it's kind of mine, that tranquility, that even that catatonia is almost like after the first murder, that's one thing. The second murder, I feel like that was sort of the proving ground where she's like, whatever happens, I've taken control of my life. It's grim and gritty and horrible, but if this guy keeps giving me the looks, I know how to take care of people now.
Well, it's funny. Polanski was talking on the commentary that there was supposed to be a third murder where Michael's wife shows up at the apartment.
Whoa.
And she discovers the bodies. And so Carol has to kill her basically to keep covering her tracks. And Polanski took that out because because that seemed like too rational of a murder. It was a murder that was born of her wanting to keep her crimes hidden as opposed to defending herself against what she saw as an attack.
Interesting. Yeah, I like the fact that there are only 2 kills at the end because this movie is very backloaded in terms of like forward momentum and action, things happening outside of Carol's head. So I think a third murder would have just turned it into a run-of-the-mill slasher,
Well, and if that's what Polanski said, he's like, you know what, we could, and it can't. I think somebody suggested that he take it out, and he's like, yep, that's good call.
All right. Well, I think that's a good place to end it. Thank you for recommending that we talk about Repulsion. I am repulsed and also drawn very much to this movie. What are your final thoughts? I mean, did you appreciate it, or did you notice things during this? You've seen it a few times now. What's changed since the last time you watched it,
What was
if anything?
interesting for me watching was when the shock moments happen, like when the arms come out of the wall and kind of grab onto her. I felt like I would have liked him to either hold the image longer or to hold the blackout longer. I felt like some of those kind of shock moments, they went so quickly into the next scene that for me, there would have been more power in holding on the image. That also might have been a cliche that he was fighting against. I don't know. But it was one of those things I did notice a couple times. I'm like, oh, I just wish you would hung on to that just a little bit longer, because I think it would have had more power. But also, I love like the opening. I forgot to mention this. The opening credits where everything is drifting by her eye. That title sequence was created by Morris Bender, who did all the James Bond openings. And he was an expensive person to get for the opening titles, but it was worth it. And if you notice, Roman Polanski's credit comes right across her eye, which is very similar to the surrealist film Un Chien Andalou, where a woman's eyelid or eyeball is sliced with a razor that's used later in the film. And it was one of those things where what a great kind of subtle bit to put in there.
Well, it's also a bit of a contrast too, because my recollection of it, I just watched the one time, was the credits going kind of up, like floating upwards,
And
but
then this one
Polanski
goes across.
yeah. Oh, and it's just that idea of that discomfort of things going in front of your eye or being that close to an eyeball. You kind of get, skeeved out by it, but yeah. Oh,
And I like the fact that you drew the connection, because I actually hadn't thought of that before, that it begins with the eye and it disappears into the eye.
yeah. it's artsy through and through from beginning to end. But yeah, AC, thank you again for recommending this. Briefly, tell us what you got coming up in the next few days, because we're just about on the door of October here.
We are on the cusp of October, and yes, I'm super excited. We're going to be doing our 13th annual October Scare-a-thon. We will again be benefiting the Women's Reproductive Rights Assistance Project. And come on over to Horror 101 with Dr. AC. We're going to be doing 31 movies in 31 days. We'll be releasing a panel discussion every evening at 8 p.m. Central Standard Time over on the Horror 101 with Dr. AC channel. And we've got an array of recent releases. I don't think there's anything older than, say, like 2017. So it's a bunch of stuff that I hadn't seen before. And so I got a whole bunch of folks together to watch them with me.
Wow. 2017. Was that a coincidence, or is there significance to that year?
No. I honestly, I thought it was for Tragedy Girls. And I just thought that it had come out more recently than that, because pretty much everything else is 2020 forward. But then I went, oh, Tragedy Girls is 2017. I guess I can't say it's just the 2020s.
Well, yeah, that's gonna be a lot of fun. We're gonna be doing some stuff in October. So I'm super excited about that.
Yeah.
So very proud to help keep this tradition going.
Absolutely.
But
well,
yeah.
I mean, to be clear, the reason that is happening is because of what we did for the past 3 years on your show. So all credit where credit's due. I would not be doing 31 shows in 31 days had I not been doing the shows with you for all those years. So thank you, sir, for your inspiration and your support.
Well, you're welcome, question mark, because I know what that kind of schedule has got to do to you. So I apologize in advance. All right, sir. Well, thanks very much, everybody out there. Check out AC's stuff. All the information will be down in the description below. And if you like what you see here, please, like and subscribe to the Kicking the Seat YouTube channel. And yeah, join us back here very soon. We're going to be talking about a lot of crazy stuff during spooky season. And until next time, whenever that is, whatever that is, thanks very much. Take care, and happy pre-Halloween.
Happy pre-Halloween, everybody.
All right. Cool. And we're out. But yeah, again, I'm going to go ask my wife about AT&T or Xfinity or something, because this has been ghastly.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Sorry you had to deal with that.
Yeah. But I appreciate your patience, and I'll let you go because I know we all got things going on. But yeah, I'll catch you later, sir.
Thank you, buddy. Take care. Bye.
All right. Bye.